Welcome to PHU classes. Today we will learn what is sympathetic nervous system.
The nervous system is divided into the central nervous system, so the brain and spinal cord, and the peripheral nervous system, which includes all the nerves that connect the central nervous system to the muscles and organs. The peripheral nervous system can be divided into the somatic nervous system, which controls voluntary movement of our skeletal muscles, and the autonomic nervous system, which is then further divided into the sympathetic and the parasympathetic, and controls the involuntary movement of the smooth muscles and the glands of our organs. The sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems have opposite effects on the body. The sympathetic nervous system controls functions like increasing heart rate and blood pressure, as well as slowing digestion. And all of this maximises blood flow to the muscles and brain, and it can help you to either run away from a threat or to fight it, which is why it's also called the fight or flight response. The parasympathetic nervous system instead slows the heart rate, decreases the blood pressure, and stimulates digestion. The effects can be summarised as rest and digest. Now, neurons are the main cells of the nervous system. They're composed of a cell body, which contains all the cell's organelles, and nerve fibres, which are projections that extend out from the neuron cell body. Nerve fibres are either dendrites that receive signals from other neurons, or axons that send signals along to other neurons. Now, where two neurons come together is called a synapse, and that's where one end of an axon sends neurotransmitters to the dendrites, or directly to the cell body of the next neuron in the series. The autonomic nervous system, so both the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous system, is made up of a relay that includes two neurons. And when there's a group of neuron cell bodies that are all next to each other, in the central nervous system, the whole thing is called a nucleus, while a group of neuron cell bodies that are located outside of the central nervous system is called a ganglion. In this video, we're just going to focus on the sympathetic nervous system. So, signals for the autonomic nervous system start in the hypothalamus, which is located at the base of the brain. Hypothalamic neurons have really long axons, up to 1.4 meters or 4.5 feet, and they carry signals all the way down to the spinal cord nuclei, where they synapse with preganglionic neuron cell bodies. The sympathetic spinal cord nuclei start at the first thoracic vertebrae, or T1, and runs all the way down to the second segment of the lumbar spinal cord, or L2. From there, the signal goes from the preganglionic neurons down its relatively short axon, exits the spinal cord, and reaches the nearby sympathetic ganglion, which is made up of lots of postganglionic neuron cell bodies. Sympathetic ganglia are divided into two major groups. These are paravertebral and prevertebral ganglia, based on their location. Paravertebral ganglia run alongside the spinal cord, and they're interconnected, forming a sympathetic chain. It's like a string of pearls, where the nerve fibres make up the strings, and the paravertebral ganglia are the pearls. Even though all preganglionic axons enter the sympathetic chain, only some of them actually synapse with the postganglionic neurons there. The rest of the preganglionic axons pass through the sympathetic chain without synapsing, and they continue on to reach the prevertebral ganglia to synapse with the postganglionic neuron cell bodies there. Okay, so there are three pairs of prevertebral ganglia. These are the celiac ganglia, located on the wall of the aorta, right above where the renal arteries branch off. Then there's the superior mesenteric ganglia, close to the origin of the superior mesenteric artery, and the inferior mesenteric ganglia, where the inferior mesenteric artery branches off the abdominal aorta. Finally, from both paravertebral and prevertebral ganglia, the axons of the postganglionic neurons leave the ganglia to reach the internal organs, where they synapse with the cells of the target organs. Now, let's zoom in on the synapses of the sympathetic nervous system. The preganglionic and postganglionic neurons release different neurotransmitters, which are the tiny little molecules that nerve cells use to communicate with one another. The preganglionic neurons release the neurotransmitter acetylcholine, and that's why the preganglionic neurons are called cholinergic neurons. Acetylcholine binds to the nicotinic receptors on the cell membrane of the postganglionic neuron cell bodies. Nicotinic receptors are ion channels that open when acetylcholine binds to them, and they allow positive ions, like sodium and calcium, to cross the cell membrane, activating the postganglionic neurons. Most postganglionic neurons are called adrenergic neurons because they release the neurotransmitters adrenaline and noradrenaline, which are collectively called catecholamines. Catecholamines activate the adrenergic receptors on the cells of the target organs. Now, there are two main groups of adrenergic receptors, alpha and beta receptors. Alpha receptors have two subtypes, alpha 1 and alpha 2, while beta receptors have three subtypes, beta 1, beta 2 and beta 3. Each of these adrenergic receptors are G-protein coupled receptors, meaning that when a catecholamine binds, it activates intracellular proteins called G-proteins. These G-proteins ultimately enable cells to change in a number of ways, and that's how the sympathetic nervous system creates a change at a cellular level. Some postganglionic neurons are cholinergic neurons, because, like the preganglionic neurons, they also secrete acetylcholine. This time, however, the acetylcholine binds to muscarinic receptors on the cells of target organs. Muscarinic receptors are also G-protein coupled receptors, so once again, it's the G-proteins that facilitate change at the cellular level. The sympathetic nervous system affects each organ system differently. In blood vessels, it acts on alpha 1 and alpha 2 adrenergic receptors, which causes vasoconstriction in some tissues, like the gastrointestinal tract, and acts on beta 2 adrenergic receptors, which causes vasodilation in other tissues, like the skeletal muscles and brain. In the heart, it acts on alpha 1 and beta 1 adrenergic receptors, which increase the heart rate and contractility, and that helps to pump more blood out. In the lungs, it acts on beta 2 adrenergic receptors, and this causes bronchodilation, which increases oxygen delivery to cells. In the salivary glands, it works on beta 2 adrenergic receptors to decrease saliva secretion. In the liver, it works on beta 2 adrenergic receptors so that more glucose is released into the blood, since the body has increased energy needs. In the pupils, it acts on alpha 1 adrenergic receptors, triggering mydriasis or dilation to help with vision. In the bladder, it acts on alpha 1, alpha 2 and beta 3 adrenergic receptors to relax the bladder muscle, called the detrusor muscle. In the skin, it works on muscarinic receptors to increase sweat production. And finally, in females, it acts on beta adrenergic receptors to cause uterine relaxation, and in males, it acts on alpha 1 adrenergic receptors to trigger ejaculation. These organs are controlled by both the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems, which have opposite effects, except for the sweat glands and blood vessels, which are only controlled by the sympathetic in an on-off manner. The sympathetic nervous system is active all the time at a low level, and in extreme or dangerous situations, the level of activation increases, triggering the fight or flight response. The net effect is that there's an increased cardiac output and that blood is diverted away from organs of the gastrointestinal tract and towards the muscles which need it to fight or run away, as well as the organs like the brain to help think more clearly and be alert. Alright, so as a quick recap, the sympathetic nervous system is one of the divisions of the autonomic nervous system. The entire system is based on a preganglionic or cholinergic neuron that releases acetylcholine and a postganglionic neuron that releases either catecholamines or acetylcholine to a target cell. In emergency situations, the activity of the sympathetic nervous system increases, and that helps with the fight or flight response because it diverts blood away from the organs that aren't necessary for survival at that moment, like the gastrointestinal tract and the bladder, and it increases the blood flow to the muscles and organs like the brain.
Thank you.